and who felt awkwardly out of place in this predominantly female environment, especially when the applause broke out for Team Edward and Team Jacob. Oh my goodness. All right, that's a first for church, hey? And then husbands who attest to their wives being changed by this series, in some instances for good, and in some instances maybe not so good. Now some of you probably are like me, like I was a week ago. You don't know much about this other than that it deals with vampires. So let me give just a brief synopsis of the series. It's a classic love triangle. Only in this instance, Bella, who is the woman who's at the center of this, is being pursued and is fond of two young men. One of them, Edward, happens to be a vampire, and the other one, Jacob, happens to be a werewolf. And both of these guys, they work hard for her affection, and they fight for her love, and are passionately committed to protecting Bella in any and every circumstance. Now, I suspect that part of the success of this series has to do with the fact that I think that scenario is every woman's dream. Right? Every woman wants to not only be loved by a man, but come on, girls, be honest. Wouldn't you love even more than that to be passionately pursued by two men, and in this instance, two handsome and men with superpowers? Right? Like, that would be just choice, wouldn't it? And one of them has to be really rich, too, right? So you've got everything. Looks, money, power, two men. All right, I'll leave it there. And you should know, too, that regardless of which man Bella goes with, there's danger involved. All right? Watching the movie, too, both Jacob and Edward at various points in the film mention that maybe even without their desiring to, they could tear her to pieces, right? They could ravish her in a moment of passion, not in a good way, maybe like, yeah, bad way type of thing. So in either instance, the love is forbidden as well. And so in this sense, there's nothing new about Twilight. In fact, the storyline, and Stephanie Meyer, the author, attests to this. She's not apologetic about the fact that her books have so many parallels to so many other classic works of literature, Jane Austen and so forth. This one was predominantly inspired by the story of Romeo and Juliet. And we see it in the legend of Tristan and Isolde, in the West Side Story between Tony and Maria, in the film Titanic between Ruth and Jack. And guys, before you get too judgmental, there's even the same storyline undergirding Braveheart. Right? William Wallace wants to marry Muron, but in order to marry her, he's got to do it secretly because her father doesn't think he's worthy of her hand. Classic love story. I suspect that another reason for the success of the Twilight series has to do with the fact that it highlights a particular type of love, namely adolescent love, and those fiery feelings that we get at the start of a romantic relationship. It brings us back to that feeling. Again, most young people, and let's be honest here, young girls in particular, long to be so head over heels in love that they and their beloved would willingly throw caution to the wind and risk life and limbs for the sake of the one they love. And that's what you get here. And again, prior to this week, I hadn't watched the movies, I hadn't read the books, and so I did what probably most pastors who would be, brave or stupid enough to agree to speak on this. I went online and I tried to see what other pastors were saying, and here's what I came across. I found an interview with Pastor John MacArthur. He's a little smarter than me. He's written 150 books, all right? And when he was asked to comment on Twilight, his response in a nutshell was this: parents, don't let your kids read these books. There's enough evil in this world without having to expose your kids to more of it through fiction. And then I watched a YouTube clip featuring one of the most prominent young pastors, a guy named Mark Driscoll. And he lambasted this movie series and book series for 14 minutes in one of his talks. 14 minutes, just a tirade about how these books are evil and about how parents are weak if they say, at least my kids are reading, because we don't want our young people just reading anything. We want them to be distinguishing readers who are going to be discerning when it comes to what they read, and on and on and on he goes. And Driscoll goes on to highlight something that is is worth mention, I think, this morning, and that's this, that one of the biggest segments of people wrapped up in the twilight phenomenon are not teens, but young moms in their 30s and 40s. In fact, in my studies, I came across this website, twilightmoms.com. All right? And as the name suggests, it's a website for moms, and it's the most popular website affiliated with Twilight. It's the most popular website. Here's what the founder of the website, Lisa Hansen, had to say to all the young moms who locate it, and I quote, this is in the welcome section, or the history. Did you think you were the only one whose life turned upside down when you read Twilight? Is your house a disaster with piles and piles of laundry in every corner and stacks of dirty dishes at record-breaking heights? Have you ever imagined your husband is a vampire? Or a werewolf? And suddenly had the libido of a newlywed again? The good news is you are not alone. Fans of the Twilight series in our stage of life now have a place where we can gather unashamed of our irrational obsession with vampires and werewolves. End of quote. Yeah. That's creepy. I mean, if you don't see it as creepy, let's turn the tables for a moment. Let's say I really like Miley Cyrus. Okay, I don't, but let's say I really, really like Miley Cyrus. And bear with me. And so I own Miley Cyrus t-shirts, and I own the Hannah Montana movie, and I watch it dozens and dozens of times, and I think about Miley Cyrus, and I talk about Miley Cyrus, and I blog about Miley Cyrus, and I seek out other middle-aged men who are into Miley Cyrus. Would you guys be okay with that? I might lose my job, I think. And I guess if it was a man that was in that kind of scenario, you know, obsessing about 16 and 17-year-old women, I'd probably be thrown in jail, and probably rightly so. Food for thought. Like I said, this week I was not familiar with the series, except that I knew it involved vampires. But based on all of the reactions that a good number of you gave to me last week, based on the reports that I had heard about how bad the acting in the film was, and how cheesy the storyline was, and based on the negative assessments given by Pastors MacArthur and Driscoll, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting much from New Moon. But guess what? The film wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It's not my genre, but it wasn't as bad as others made it out to be either. Yes, there are vampires and werewolves in it, but I was expecting this. I mean, this is a work of fiction, after all. Not unlike Harry Potter, The Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings. Yes, the film deals with evil powers and forces of darkness, but I accept that we live in a world with forces of darkness and evil powers, both visible and invisible, so that wasn't a surprise to me. What's more, Stephanie Meyer, the author of the series, does something creative, I believe. She puts a fresh, unique twist on the whole vampire kind of nature of vampires and what they're capable of. And it's one that gives you pause for thought. Edward and his family are not your typical stripe of vampire. And it caused me to think about my own life and what Paul the Apostle says in Romans chapter 7 about the good that I would do, I don't end up doing, but sometimes the evil I don't want to do, that's the stuff that I end up doing. And Stephanie Meyer's vampires, at least in Edward's family, are kind of like that. They're caught in this inner battle as well as this external battle as well.